where calves learn to feed for themselves, and that's why they live in the Antarctic waters in summer, and then when it starts to get cold, they come up our east coast of Australia, up towards Hervey Bay in Queensland, where they calve and bring their young ones back down to the Antarctic. Okay, whale breathing and blowing. The whale comes up to blow out air and take in air before diving again. They can get down to extraordinary depths. And I didn't know this, but whales can be identified from the spout it makes from the blowhole. So you've got a blue whale there, a right whale, and a sperm whale. So you can have a look at the different sorts of whales so we know what we're talking about. The biggest whale is the biggest animal that's ever lived on Earth. It's 100 feet long. It weighs up to 100 tonnes, sometimes bigger. The sperm whale's a bit smaller. The humpback whale, the right whale, the killer whale, all different shapes and sizes. So there's no such thing as the one whale. The biggest one, Balanoptera musculus. It's a deep blue colour at the water surface, hence its name. It's bigger than Tyrannosaurus rex. Average weight exceeds 100 tonnes and gets up to 150 tonnes, which is a lot of weight. Weight of 20 African elephants. Found in most oceans. It's the most abundant species of whale. Like the others, hunted almost to extinction. 95 to 90%, the 99% were wiped out. We'll see how that came about. It's amazing a creature that big could get so high in the air. Now, what does it live on? It lives on krill, which is a tiny shrimp. Its average speed is walking speed, 5 kilometres an hour, when it's cruising, but it can go 25 kilometres an hour when it's threatened. There's a small triangular dorsal fin, flippers at 12% of body length. It's a filter feeder, which is baleen, mature at 5 to 10 years, and lives to 90 years. So there's a picture of a krill, that's on the end of the finger. It's a tiny little shrimp that you get down in the Antarctic. Now, baleen is a filter, and the whales open their mouths, they suck in a large amount of water, and they filter out the krill. So at birth, the calf of a blue whale is about 7.3 metres, 24 feet long, and weighs about 3 tonnes at birth. It's fed on a diet of rich milk, doubles its weight in a week. Then it gains 90 kilograms pounds weight each day. It's weaned at about 6 months. So it's an extraordinary growth, isn't it? And by that time they've doubled their length and they're 10 times heavier than they were at birth. Now the humpback whale is a different sort of whale. It feeds on plankton, which are tiny little things that live in the water. And on the surface layers, they take huge gulps of water as they swim along. The tongue forces out water through a baleen, and that holds the plankton, and it has long flippers. So it's a different shape. So there's your plankton under the microscope, tiny little things. And there's your baleen again. And there's the humpback whale, so the longer flippers and a totally different shaped head. Now, what humpback whales sing, if I had more time, I'd get some sound of humpback whales singing because it's quite extraordinary listening to them. They make a musical pattern of sounds, and the sounds vary from season to season. Whales in the same breeding ground sing the same song, which slowly changes, it evolves during the season. Each breeding season starts with a song used at the end of the last season. Isn't that extraordinary communication? And humpback whale singing has been heard at a distance for 185 kilometres. Sound is ocean water is a very good conductor of sound. Now the right whale. The right whales were the right ones to catch by the whalers. They are baleen whales again, which means they have no teeth, they have those filters. So there's a right whale. Now the sperm whale has got a large square-shaped head. It's the largest of all the toothed whales. So this has got teeth. Lives on octopus and giant squid. And I find it fascinating, these stories from the ancient seafarers about encounters between whales and giant squid that apparently live in our oceans. Coming across whales with sucker marks that wide on the whale. So it's quite an enormous creature living down in the ocean. They live in all oceans, hunted almost to extinction. They can stay underwater for an hour before they come up, and they can dive to 1,000 metres, 3,300 feet, which is as high as the Great Dividing Range is above sea level. It's quite extraordinary. There's a whale tooth, a human hand. And I found this quote from a book, a new book out called Rising Tide, Falling Star. And the title's all one word, like that. Published by Fourth Estate, 2018. Some years ago, when making a film, Hoare encountered a sperm whale in the ocean. To share its element was the most extraordinary thing. I was so scared. It's the world's greatest predator. He could hear the click, click, click of its sonar echo as it created a sound picture of him in his head. Its cliff-like face came within touching distance, and he said, it's the most amazing thing in my life, coming face to face. It's a sperm whale. Now, the spermacet whale, this description of them, they were thick and heavy, and some of their heads, which are full of the purest oil, weighed 20 tonnes. So this is what the whalers are after. They're after the whale oil and the whale meat, as well as the blubber. More of that later. There's a baleen whale, different one again. The beluga whale. It's pure white. It lives on fish and sea animals. Pilot whale, they're not these. This one and the previous one aren't southern hemisphere whales, but they exist. It's a type of dolphin. They live in large groups. They call pilot whales because they follow a leader, or a pilot. And they have peg-like teeth, which are common to all whales. Strange looking thing, isn't it? Then you've got killer whales, orca, the largest of the dolphins, lives on fish, squid, seals, seabirds and dolphins. Groups of killer whales attack whales. Whale tongue is what they're after, so they get the whale around the mouth and try and pull its mouth open so they can eat the poor thing's tongue. It has a large dorsal fin. It's got those white markings on it too. And of course we've got our dolphins, the porpoise. Enough about dolphins, let's have a look at man and whales. We've all heard about Jonah in the Christian Bible. He was a Hebrew prophet. He was thrown into the sea by sailors, as you did with Hebrew prophets. He was swallowed up by a big fish called a whale. We've got a picture of that shortly and to see what it looks like, quite extraordinary. The whale later cast Jonah onto dry land, and Jonah, surviving all this, continued his preaching. So it's a strange looking, it's a cross between a whale and a fish. But there it is, released Jonah onto the land and he continued preaching. All seafaring nations record friendship between whales and humans. There are many stories of dolphins rescuing sailors at sea and giving rides to young people. Quite extraordinary. Whales have a low birth rate. They survive quite comfortably until humans began to kill them for food and other things. Thousands of years ago, men were believed to have hunted whales from canoes. That's a pretty risky business. Large-scale industrial whaling began in the United States in the 1760s. As Americans, always trouble. By the mid-1800s, America had a vast international whaling fleet, and that's when the numbers of whales started to drop significantly. Now, whale oil was used as fuel for lamps. Around the end of the 19th century, we discovered kerosene. It was a more readily available fuel for lamps. In the 1860s, the Norwegian invented the harpoon gun. Now, this is a nasty little piece of equipment. It explodes a grenade inside the whale, causing it an agonising death. In the 1930s to 50s, some 30,000 whales have been killed annually. The 1946 Whaling Commission was established to regulate the international whaling industry. today, Japan continues whale hunting for scientific research. And if you are following the news, Japan wants to increase their quota. They don't produce evidence of this scientific research, but they keep doing it. Now, what the procedure was, small whale boats would go out, harpoon the whales, and then tow them back to a whaling station on the shore. That system was later refined, as we'll see. Blubber was melted down, what they call rendered, into oil for lamps, lubricants, candles, and base for perfumes and soaps. Balloon whalebone was used for corsets, whips, and umbrellas. There's a whale oil lamp. And if you go to the Jervis Bay Maritime Museum, you'll see that the equipment they use, the harpoons, and the last two at the bottom, they're called flensing tools. They're for digging into the blubber and cutting it down to the meat, and then cutting the blubber into sections and peeling it off the whale meat. There's a harpoon gun, the Maritime Museum. It's a very nasty harpoon. It's going to be projected into the whale with a line attached to it. And there's the modern harpoon gun on the deck of a ship. And you can see the grenade here, the hand grenade. It explodes on impact and does a lot of damage. Tins of whale meat. This is, if you go to Japan, you could buy whale meat in a tin. Looks like that. It's regarded as a luxury food. It's also eaten in Norway and Iceland, and they still hunt whales for food. Now, inspired by international groups like Greenpeace, 5-year international ban on whaling was declared in 1986. And as I said, Norway and Iceland continue today to hunt whales, to flog the meat to Japan. Now, in Australia, how did we get involved? 1791, when the Third Fleet arrived from England. After unloading the convicts, 5 ships set out to hunt whales: the Britannia, Mary Ann, William and Anne, Salamander and Matilda. Got a picture of the Matilda shortly. Violent weather resulted in the ships catching only 1 whale each. Full of whale oil, 4 ships reached London. So they'd be making a lot of money from that, with full ships. The Matilda was later wrecked in the North Pacific. So here's Peru up here at the top of South America. The whaling operations were established in Port Lincoln, South Australia, Portland Bay and Victor Harbour, and along the Great Australian Bight. Whaling ships brought supplies, raw materials and labour, and in 1803 they helped establish the first settlement in Tasmania at Risdon. And Captain Bunker, an Australian whaling pioneer, observed whales were so thick he could take them without looking. Amazing, isn't it, how many there used to be? And by 1839 in Tasmania there were 20 whaling stations just hunting whales. Maritime Authority advised ships to stay in the middle of the Derwent River to avoid the southern right whales because they were a hazard to shipping. And I think it was only last week there was an account of a boat hitting a whale and sinking off the east coast of Australia. Now this is from the Jervis Bay Maritime Museum, the National Trust magazine, 1990. Whaling was the colony's primary export resource until 1833 when it was surpassed by wool. I never knew that, and it's just an extraordinary fact how much we relied on whales as a source of income before wool took over. Peaked in the 1840s, it was seriously affected by gold fever among the crews in the 1850s because they, once they got to shore at Australia, they'd hop off the ship and head off to the goldfields and then to go in Ballarat and later at Hill End in New South Wales. By the end of the century, it was in big trouble because they'd literally running out of whales. So there's the Great Australian Bight here, the southern part of Australia. As I said, the harpoon gun was invented, exploding harpoon gun was invented in 1864. 1880 it was fitted to steamships. Now, the invention of factory ships and whale chasing boats saw whales hunted nearly to extinction. You know how efficient humans are at developing ways of killing other things like animals and other people. Well, they did it to the whales as well. And you can see there the declining catch of whales until the international nations decided to ban whaling altogether to try and preserve them, and they are coming back slowly. So in 49 to 62, an estimated 83 humpback whales were killed. In 1962, it ended in New South Wales when the last whaling station at Cape Byron closed down. And in 79, we enacted an anti-whaling policy in Australia, and that was followed by the 1999 Commonwealth Environment and Biodiversity Conservation Act, and in 2006, the New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Amendment, Marine Mammals Regulation. Now, Captain Matthew Weatherhead, he was the captain of the Matilda. It was one of the 5 ships that come out for the 3rd Fleet and then headed off to catch whales. It departed Portsmouth in England in 1791, arrived at Port Jackson after 127 days. Steamships made a big difference to the amount of travel time, and it was built in France in 1779. Now, Matthew Weatherhead had seen large pods of whales on the voyage up the southeast coast of Australia. In November 1791, after unloading the convicts, Weatherhead voyaged south to hunt whales. But Matilda began to leak, and Weatherhead entered Jervis Bay to effect repairs. And he made an eye draft of Jervis Bay. He noted, "There is exceeding good anchorage here." And that was the big attraction to ships in the 19th century, was the anchorage in Jervis Bay. And at one stage it was going to be a port for Canberra in the 1920s, but that's another story. Now, in the Sydney Daily Mail and New South Wales Advertiser, 1911, it said on page 2, Jervis Bay was later explored by Captain Weatherhead, Matthew Weatherhead of the ship Matilda, South Sea whaler. Matilda was decommissioned from the Royal Navy, became a whaling ship in the southern, looking for southern sperm whales in the Southern Ocean. In 1840, like many ships, it was shipwrecked. And this photograph's in the Jervis Bay Maritime Museum. The artist is Ian Hansen, and he's got quite a number of paintings there. We'll see a couple of them today, and they're just extraordinary representations of history. I was so taken when I first saw them, I thought I've got to include them in my presentations. And, to give it authenticity, there's your Aboriginals there with their canoes here and here for getting around. And there's the Matilda off, looks like Currambeen Creek there. So, 1790s to 1912. Now, Jervis Bay was used to render the catch. It was the shore base, boiling up the blubber for oil and retrieving the whalebone. So these carcasses are on the beach, being hacked to pieces. The ships were reprovisioned with food and water at Bristol Point, and a settlement grew up there to supply the whaling ships. More of that a bit later. Most ships lost crew members in the 1850s when they deserted to look for gold, and a number of whaling bases operated. Now, 1794 was the first commercial use of Jervis Bay. The supply ships provided stores for whaling ships of the Great Southern Whaling Fleet. And now this is on the eastern side of Jervis Bay. This is Hare Bay here, this little creek there, and there are whaling rendering stations here, here, and here at Montague Point. That's Green Point, which I never knew. Now, Captain William Kinghorn, you've all heard of Kinghorn Street Narra. There is a connection. It's named after him. He had one ship in 1840 operating at Cabbage Tree Point over near Hare Bay, He hunted black sperm and humpback whales. 1843 he stopped operating because of the cost of transporting whale products to Sydney. Now this is with a dray cart. There's one of those at Jasper's Brush right near the highway. I don't know if you've noticed there on the right-hand side heading towards Berry. There's an ancient dray cart there. So it's very slow. If they're using oxen, the maximum they can do a day is about 12 miles. So all that adds up to expense. And as well, there's a decreasing number of whales. Here's the man himself, Captain William Kinghorn, with the E. And that's painted in 1834, before photography. It's always interesting to look at the people rather than just look at their names and draw conclusions. He's a very determined-looking gentleman. He was born 1796. His father was Alexander. His mother was Elizabeth, and he had 9 siblings, which was all the go then. Myself was Sir Henry Parkes, which I did the detail earlier this term. He had 18 children, which was rather a lot, with only 2 wives. Right, so there's the representation again by Ian Hansen of the whaling station at Montague Point. Hare Bay is just around the corner, and it always likes to include Aboriginals, and here he's got their dogs. There's a little whale boat. It's used for chasing the whales and pulling them ashore, so the larger ship would be offshore. And they're hauled in, then pulled up this ramp, and this is the blubber being boiled down into oil. Be pretty smelly. It gets worse, but descriptions of what it was like. Very different from today. Kinghorn left Scotland in 1822, came to Van Diemen's Land, Tasmania. He trained as a civil engineer and surveyor. So how did he end up hunting whales? He spent several years in the British Royal Navy and the Merchant Navy. And Governor, in 1823, Lieutenant Governor William Sorrell, Governor of Tasmania, he appointed him as Master Mariner and gave him a command of the government schooner Waterloo. The schooner's a small sailing ship. He was one of the 2 vessels working the perilous supply route between Hobart and the penal colony of Macquarie Harbour. I've got a map of that, which I'll show you shortly. Kinghorn later commanded the Cyprus. He made many trips to Macquarie Harbour. The return cargo was a Huon pine, that beautiful timber, logged by convicts. And it was excellent for shipbuilding because it's got a natural oil in it, like sandalwood, and that natural oil in the Huon pine stops insects eating into it. English oak wasn't much good against those naughty little insects eating timber. Then he was commander of the Prince Leopold. He made voyages to Launceston on the Tamar River carrying timber. So from Hobart, here, he's sailing around here up to the Tamar River, up to Launceston delivering timber. And if you've ever been to the Tamar River, around Georgetown at the entrance, you can see lots of rock shoals out in the middle of the water. It's not a proper river in that sense. There's water in it, but it's a bit dangerous for shipping. And Macquarie Harbour, from Hobart, around the south here and up here to Strawn. And yes, that's right, that's where the Gordon River is. Who's done the Gordon River cruise? They're quite splendid, isn't it? Up there in Macquarie Harbour. And the trip I was on came up to Hell's Gates. It's a really narrow entrance into the harbour. It's quite a shallow harbour. And they've got fish farming in there. But there's problems with pollution because, while it's big, it's very shallow and there's not a great deal of water in it. So there's Macquarie Harbour. Hell's Gates up here. And I think that's the Gordon down there. Anyway, it's a splendid trip. If you haven't done it, it's worth doing. So 1834 it was closed. Kinghorn captained the Isabella. He transported convicts, passengers and goods between Hobart and Port Arthur. He occasionally came to Sydney in his early. He made over 90 voyages as captain of government ships. 1840 he left the government service. he relocated to Jervis Bay. He established his whaling station for 3 years. On retirement, he lived on his brother's property near Goulburn. He died at 1878, aged 82. His family are buried in a cemetery up there, St James Anglican Church, Kippalaw, and he never married or had children. He conducted the most successful shore-based whaling operation in the 1840s in Jervis Bay. As we saw, it's on the northeastern shore over near Hare Bay. He operated a factory ship adjacent to his brother Alexander Kinghorn's land grant of Mount Jervis. So it was a family connection. In 1841, he had 14 men working for him, and they lived in a timber house on Cabbage Tree Point.
Did you say where he was buried?
Sorry?
Did you say where he's buried?
Yeah, up near Kippalaw, up near Goulburn. There it is. It's in the cemetery at St James Anglican Church. Right. 1841, a passenger aboard the ship Augustus wrote a letter to the editor. After contending against baffling and contrary winds for 9 or 10 days, must have been an east coast low blowing, resolved to run into Jervis Bay for shelter and supplies. After a short walk, the boat was again manned and we proceeded on board. And alongside we discovered that a party of whalers had pulled off, bearing with them a quantity of fine snappers recently caught, which were they were busily engaged in disposing to the sailors. And as you know, the town village Woolamaya is Aboriginal for a place of good snapper fishing, in case you're a fishing person. Those men formed part of a whaling station, said the Sydney Gazette, 1841, on the western shore of the bay, belonging to Mr. Kinghorn, and their occupation is during the winter to look out for whales, and in the summer to catch smaller fish, which are salted and dried and filled at the Sydney for sale. I found that fascinating, how the bay was used. Several whaling families lived at Bristol Rocks and Green Patch. Passing whaling ships regularly called into Jervis Bay for wood and water and to clean their ships. Of course, in the whaling industry, they get pretty smelly and pretty messy with all the whale bits. Now, for the boats they used, barges, cutters, gig, jolly boat. Yes, that is a boat. A launch, a longboat, a pinnace, a shallop, a wherry, and a yawl. I've never seen so many names for these boats. The introduction of davits on ships meant more versatile small whaleboats could be used and use them as lifeboats. So that's a Montague whaler. It's good for hunting because it doesn't have a separate stern end. The bow and the stern are the same shape, so you can row the ship forwards and backwards as well. So you've got that manoeuvrability. As ship's boats were essential, they'd set and weigh the ship's anchor, they'd sound the depths, they'd transfer crew and passengers from ship to ship and ship to shore, they'd get the fresh water and obtain wood for the ship's kitchen. Every ship had a kitchen of it. Ship's boats were used by Captain Cook to map the St Lawrence River in the USA and the Great Barrier Reef in 1770. When the ship was becalmed, the boats could be used to tow the ship. Just attach a tow line and the sailors would row away under the captain's direction. So this picture is St Jervis Bay Maritime Museum, and you can see the whale boats on the side of the ship. There were lifeboats. So this is where the concept of lifeboats began, using little whale boats. So between 1850 and 1900, whaling ships from Ben Boyd Settlement at Twofold Bay, who's been to the Whaler Museum there, quite a fascinating place to look at. But increasing demand for whale oil in the late 19th century and the depletion of the northern hemisphere whale fisheries saw the arrival in Jervis Bay of increasing numbers of American whaling ships working in the Southern Ocean whale fisheries. Now, this is from the Kiama Independent and Shoalhaven Advertiser, 1866. Robert Edwards, an American whaler, with Captain Hamblin. 800 barrels of oil put into Jervis Bay last week. 3 of his crew bolted. They were captured and taken before the Shoalhaven bench as deserters, and contrary to all expectations, they were discharged. The barrel of oil was 40 gallons, nearly as big as a 44-gallon drum, and weighed 400 pounds. So maneuvering a barrel of whale oil was a difficult business. This is from the Kiama Independent Shoalhaven Advertisement in 1870. The Hobart Town bark Aladdin towed 2 sperm whales into the bay for the purpose of securing the blubber and boiling down. That's just a nice way of saying chopping it to bits. It was blowing an easterly gale at the time. They finished the operation and sailed yesterday. So this is just to show how Jervis Bay is being used by whaling ships. And same newspaper, 1872, 2 Hobart Town whales were in the bay. Last week a very large whale came in and boats were immediately sent from each of the vessels to try and capture him, but failed, and he went out to sea again. I have an idea that if Captain Harris of the Water Witch had been in port, his whale ship would have been secured. The carved wooden figurehead from the Water Witch is located in the National Maritime Museum in Hobart, Tasmania. And the Water Witch was one of the ships that used to come into the port of Jervis Bay when they actually built a wharf there in the late 1840s with the purpose of sending wool coming down from Goulburn and up in the tablelands over to London. But you'd have to come to my presentation on South Huskisson, which is the old name for Vincentia in the 1840s, when there was a town there that eventually became derelict and abandoned. So if you're interested in that story, have a chat to Nev, and he might book me up for next year, unless you want to hear about the Wool Road. But that's another story. So there's a figure at the head of ship. In the 19th century and earlier, particularly the British had bowsprits like this, and this is the job my great-grandfather did as a wood carver, carving those things out of a solid piece of timber. Quite extraordinary achievement. Now the Shoalhaven chronograph. Any of you in the Shoalhaven Historical Society? Okay, well, the Shoalhaven chronograph used to be their journal. In 1986, it said, 1917 and in 1929, efforts were made to secure some 80 acres of Beecroft Peninsula by the Australian whaling syndicates to build a shore-based whaling factory. So that just shows how late they were trying to establish the whaling industry. An 80-year-old Mr. Norman Rosser of Huskisson said, he well remembers the factory ship over near Hare Bay and the 7 chasers attached to the mother ship. His father was a Dane from Copenhagen, and the family fished Jervis Bay for many years. So we've got a factory ship over there just parked offshore. The whales will be processed on shore, and then the factory ship would take the whale oil off to market. The ship was called the Loch Tay, and it was there for 2 years, 1912, 1913. The Australian Whaling Company was permitted by the New South Wales government, can't see Gladys doing that, to station the Loch Tay in Jervis Bay. 8,000 tonnes, so it's quite a big ship. It had 3 whale chasers at the beginning, the Sorrel, the Lion and the Campbell, and it had full support from the New South Wales government. So this ship was parked over near Hare Bay for 2 years, the Loch Tay. And 12 and 13, they harpooned 487 whales within a few miles of Jervis Bay. Now, the only way you could get that number of whales is if they're coming up from the Antarctic to Hervey Bay in Queensland, or coming down with their calves from Hervey Bay back to the Antarctic. So they come in fairly close to the coast. The Loch Tay also carried thousands of pounds worth of guano, which is bird poo, which island Nauru used to be covered in depth of something like 15 feet. Got a lot of phosphate in it. It was used for fertiliser. but the enterprising miners took every last bit of it and just left the bare rock. The Norwegians spent £11,500 on coal and on provisions. Then went to New Zealand and returned in 1913 with a second factory ship. So they're really getting stuck into the whales. 1913 from June to October, they killed the 379 whales. And that, of course, is the whaling migration season. And 2,666 tonnes of whale oil was obtained from those whales. Now, the Loch Tay was fitted out in 1911 and 12. It left Cardiff in Wales in 1912, headed for Fremantle. And I found this in the Kalala Beach newsletter. The blue whale, which during a southerly gale drifted ashore from the factory ship Loch Tay, and the Norwegian company was operating there and became deeply embedded in the sand. So there's the unfortunate creature in the sand, and it's embedded because you can see there they have to dig out the sand to get access to it. And that's in 2016, Kalala Bay newsletter, a copy of which is in the Jervis Bay Maritime Museum. So there's the whale being processed. The whale chaser is nudging it into the shore, and they'll get it ashore and cut it up. Now, there was an unpleasant side of catching all these whales in Jervis Bay. And there was a doctor in Nowra, Albert Boba. This is what he said in the Shoalhaven Telegraph in 1914. Those Norwegian whalers should be kept out of Jervis Bay. They are no earthly use to us, will buy as little as possible from us, import everything from Norway, pay low wages and deplete our whaling industry. And in 1912, in the Shoalhaven News and South Coast District's advertisement, Mr. J. Miller of Canberra, an enthusiastic fisherman, writes, "The waters of Jervis Bay are being polluted to such an extent the fish are leaving the bay instead of entering it. The waters are of a milky appearance and have a peculiar odour. Sick means just as it's written, while the shores are strewn with large pieces of blubber, intestines, etc. The oysters are also turning white. We've seen large schools of fish approach the entrance, but as soon as they reach this discoloured water, they immediately turn back. We attribute the above causes to the presence of two large factory ships with their attendant gunboat whalers. One, the Loch Tay, causing the greater pollution, is presumed through the use of acids, chemicals, etc. in the treatment of whales. So, pristine Jervis Bay was being a bit polluted. This is ruining the fishing industry and keeping tourists and amateur fishermen from patronising Jervis Bay. We understand that no revenue is being collected from these foreign ships. They carry all their own goods, butter, pommes materials, fitters and coopers' goods. Coopers, of course, make the barrels. In fact, they're fully equipped to do all their own work with their own men and materials. This is no good in Australia. We point out that parts of Jervis Bay, the deposited grease causes the sand to adhere to the feet when one walks on it. Right, there are many complaints from farmers, fishermen and oyster farmers made about the strong odour of the water and the offal. That's all the intestines and things floating in the water. And operations of the Loch Tay ceased at the end of 1913. Mr. Norman Rosson again, writing in the Shoalhaven Chronograph, said, he maintains the whales were not the nuisance the Navy had made out. He said that one time after a big storm, Jervis Bay was white with foam. This was blamed on the whales polluting the water, but according to my informant, Norman Rosson, it was merely the water being churned up by the storm. Now, of course, the Navy at this time was getting interested in Jervis Bay, and it doesn't really want a whaling industry there. We'll see a bit more about that later. The whalemen used to come ashore and stores for the ship were purchased from the local shopkeepers, so I guess the tiny village of Huskisson saw the departure of the Norwegians as a blow to the local economy. Now, that contradicts the accounts I presented before, which means or shows that you really can't just accept one source. You've got to look at others and to get a range of views to try and work out what's actually happening. The whaling industry of Jervis Bay was having trouble with deserters, as we saw. Men who signed under Norwegian conditions find the pay inadequate here, and they naturally clear out to better themselves. And what better attraction could there be than the goldfields? And this one is just, they didn't all survive. This was the death of a Swedish sailor, Carl Niklasen, employed on the Loch Tay, captained by Hans Egenus. 1919, this was the last attempt to set up a whaling station. A businessman offered to build a whaling station which would employ several hundred workers. So that's a lot of workers to process the whales. Acting Prime Minister William Watt stated, "It would be unwise to permit the establishment of a whaling station which is in close proximity to Naval College HMAS Creswell." Fair comment. So the government is not supporting any more whaling in Jervis Bay. Now Scrimshaw, you'll see examples of this in the Jervis Bay Maritime Museum. This is what a sailor did in his spare time. He'd carve designs into a whale's teeth and then keep the designs as souvenirs, like that Scrimshaw. Whalebone needle that would be used for repairing sails. And if you go to Hyams Beach today, you'll see two whalers' cottages there in Cyrus Street, number 59. You'll see this one, which you can rent. They're very small, aren't they? Well, that one is. And next door at 57 Cyrus Street is Minkie. Well, Minkie, of course, is a Northern Hemisphere whale. There's a school there for the whaling children of the whalers. Bristol Point was originally called Tamarang, after a native guide. The school opened in 1876 to cater for the families of the men who worked to supply the water from Telegraph Point and wood from the local bush needed by the whalers. The school was staffed mostly by young ladies as pupil teachers. Enrolment reached 20 pupils. Then the school in 1885 shifted near the lighthouse because whaling had declined, the numbers in the school had declined, so the school moved to the lighthouse to accommodate the educational needs of the lighthouse family children. 1889, whalers ceased to call into Jervis Bay. The school was shifted to the lighthouse paddock, and then the New Bristol School was closed when the lighthouse was shifted to Point Perpendicular, and Cape Sir George Lighthouse was demolished in 1901. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you found that interesting.